Hey everybody, this week we're getting into our illustration unit. So I've got a pretty simple but kind of intricate project that we're going to be working on in Adobe Illustrator that hopefully will just get you reacclimated to clicking around in the program and learning a few different tools that maybe you might not have learned before. So first things first, what we need to do is we're going to start working with a portrait of some kind. So I've got we're going to create kind of low poly portraits that look similar to the one that I've got in my preview box here. Kind of has that video game blocky look. It can be as complex or as simple as you choose, but this will hopefully just help you kind of learn a little bit about getting around Illustrator. So first things first, I took a photo of myself, kind of a cringeworthy selfie, but just to demonstrate. This is going to be the image that I'm working with. I'd recommend that you take a photo of yourself or of a friend or somebody that you want to create a portrait of. It's always more fun when we're working originally and we're working on something that's meaningful to us. So anyway, you've got your portrait. Again, it's a pretty high quality photo. There's a lot of good differences in color and value. There's some brightness and shadow that's happening here. That's going to help me get a much better effect. So first things first, just go ahead and let's open this up in Illustrator. And this will bring up a new document. If I zoom out with Command and minus, we can see that it's too large for my canvas, so I can just grab my bounding box, Shift and Option, and resize this to fit. So that looks pretty good. I can zoom in. I can maybe even think about new placements and things like this. If I want the face to take up a little bit more space, that's totally fine. And now what I can do is just go up to the top with my image selected, click Crop Image, and we can drag that crop box around just to make sure that there's nothing kind of hanging out at the edge of the artboard. And we're kind of tightly snipped in there. Okay, so that looks pretty good to me. A couple other things you need to do in order to get started. And what we're going to do is essentially set up a grid for us to work from that allows us to click points on the grid and make sure that all of our lines kind of align neatly and have that nice geometric look. What we need to do is go up to the top to View and go down and make sure that we have Snap to Point selected. We also want to have Snap to Grid selected. And then also we want to show the grid. So once I do this, we should be able to see the grid show up. And if I zoom in, you can see all the little squares a little bit more in detail. And what you might need to do, if for some reason you clicked show the grid and your picture shows up on top of the grid as opposed to behind it, what you need to do is go up to the Illustrator menu, go to Preferences, find Guides and Grid, and make sure that the Grids in Back box is unselected. You can also change the size of your grid right now by changing the subdivision section. So right now I have it set to 16, but if I were to set this to 4, we'll see that the grid got much larger. I want to find something that's kind of a middle ground, that's a little kind of pixelated looking, but still gives us like a fair amount of detail that we can kind of pick, because every point that we select here when we're creating our image is going to be aligned to that grid. So I found that 16 points, 72 points and 16 subdivisions worked for my image. Depending on the resolution of yours or how detailed you want to get with your picture, you might set that up or down a little bit. Okay, so now we've got this set, we've got our grid, it's visible, it's set the way that we want. If you click over to your layers panel, or you can always go up to Window and find your layers and make sure that that's selected. Let's just call this our image layer. Oops, don't need the slash mark, but image layer, and let's create a new layer on top of that, and we're going to call this one low poly. Oops, I'll get it eventually. Low poly. We can also click the lock on our image so that we know we are not working with that layer at all. We're only going to be drawing into our low poly area. Okay, so the first thing we want to do, go over and grab the pen tool. You can do this over in the menu, or you can just click the P button on your keyboard, and we're going to start drawing in our image. So we're going to just kind of pay attention to the outlines and the contours in this step. But the first thing we need to do is make sure that we find like our color of our line, the pen that we're going to be using. Right now we can see it has a fill set to white. We actually want to just deselect that. We don't want to fill, and we want to pick a stroke color that is going to be kind of bright and visible. So you can do this either up here or down here. If I double click on my stroke menu chooser there, I can just pick, let's pick like a bright green, something that we know we're going to be able to see. It's going to stand out. Okay, so that should be set. Another thing I might do is just set it up to 2 point, just because I know with the resolution I'm working with, that'll be more visible. And all I have to do now is just start clicking around my picture, and we can notice that the pen tool automatically finds an intersection on that grid that we've set. And so what this is doing is it's rendering out our picture into kind of this blocky form, right? It's aligning it in a really geometric and limited way that will help us kind of achieve that final effect that I showed you. So again, just start clicking around. My advice to you is to use to create as few points as possible. You'll find that that's going to help you kind of, it's going to save a lot of headache, honestly, later on. It's going to keep it limited to the most bare minimum number of shapes. Obviously, certain parts of your face, it's going to be helpful to have more points, more definition, even in terms of like the tradition of portrait painting. People were using more detail, more intense and visible brush strokes in the eyes and in these features kind of in the interior of the face as opposed to the outline. So again, I've just clicked a few shapes around here. I've done the outline just kind of my face and my neck, and I'm going to go back in. And now what we want to do is start also kind of looking for some interior contours. So maybe the hairline here, just kind of even faking it a little bit here and there. Don't have to be too exact. Again, the least amount of points that you can do this in, it's going to look blockier. It's going to look a little bit more like rendered. And again here, when I'm finishing a path, I want to make sure that I'm always aligning to the grid. Having that selection done will help you, but we also want to do things, also maybe like the eyebrows, really simply, kind of playing around with those shapes. Again, the more geometric and the more limited you can do this kind of effect, I think the happier you'll be. So again, let's just kind of go and get this one. Looks like a decent kind of shape for the eyebrow there. We might also do, the eyes, just finding those interior contours, right? The lines that seem to stick out, the side of the nose, down to like the bulb of the nose, kind of around the nostril. So this is what, is your first step. It's just kind of doing a line drawing in a really simple geometric way. So I've done this all in advance. I can show you kind of where I ended up on this, is if we zoom into this one. What I've done is I've actually gone and once I've done my line drawing, I didn't feel like I needed to see the grid, but I can show the grid again. And we can see here, just outlined in green, the really bare minimum contours that I did. The eyes, I did the pupils and the irises of the eyes, I did the eyebrows, some kind of defining lines in the hair and the nose and the lips and ear. That's essentially like the only contours that I outlined in advance. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do now is what we need to do is, now we've got our line drawing kind of set, we're going to start creating this, breaking this down into more complex shapes. This is a super kind of intuitive process the more that you go along with it, but as of now, we can start really simply. So maybe I just find a point and I draw in here somewhere where I think like I might want to break down another plane. And I can do this, again, like kind of breaking it down arbitrarily or with order. See here, I'm following more like the shadow and kind of the contours of the chin again. And I'm going to just start breaking this into smaller shapes. So I've got my pen tool. As you notice, if I hover over the end of a line, it'll give a little slash mark. That means if you click that then, you can continue the line. As always, I can create a new line just by pressing the P button, and it will create a new kind of pen point. Again, let's say I want to connect this one here to this one here, but it's giving me the minus sign. If I was to click that now on this point, you see it would subtract that. But if I hold shift while I'm hovering over that point, that'll allow me to create a new line that just connects the two. so I can go just like this. And again, I'm going to work in triangles. I think triangles are a really nice, simple polyform. This is kind of what I did throughout, was just kind of connecting these lines the best that I could in the most simple kind of neat way possible. So again, let me just I'll just demonstrate this out a little bit more for you. Just kind of connecting these lines, making sure that I'm always clicking on points that intersect at those grid marks, and that's going to give us our kind of low poly sort of look. Let's see, we can see a point here. So you don't want to have, you know, too complicated of shapes. That's why I work in the triangle. A lot of the examples that you'll see of stuff like this works in triangles. But you know, it's not set in stone. You could work in, you know, square forms or rectangular forms or pentagons or whatever geometric form you want for different effects. So again, I can always find a point by hovering over it and seeing how that looks there. Let's see here, just kind of playing it by ear to some degree, but also giving it some thought as I'm going through about, you know, what the planes of these will actually kind of look like once done. So there we go. You know, that kind of got into this in more detail. Obviously, in the eyes, we're going to have a lot more. You might want to zoom in because you're going to have more finely subdivided sorts of lines. So here's an interesting thing here. We see, you know, I have a point here that needs to be completed, but we can notice that the eye doesn't quite exactly line up. There's going to be some kind of fudging around that you'll need to do. So if I grab my direct selection tool and I select this line around that goes around our eye, and then get my pen tool again and I hover over it at a point or somewhere, it should go to a plus sign. Sometimes these things are finicky. There we go. We've got a plus sign. I'm going to go ahead and click plus there. We can see it's added a new point. And what I might do is actually drag this over and then drag this up so that it now meets. Again, this is a contained shape that's going to kind of render the effect. So look for those kind of loose shapes, that little things that you'll notice that you need to connect that maybe didn't quite connect exactly, and you'll kind of need to pay attention to those. That'll help kind of sell the effect. But again, you know, going back in, setting these all to kind of triangles. I found in the center of an eye, kind of creating a point in the center, and then creating sort of these radiating lines from outward from the center, kind of, oops, gives me the best effect. Again, holding shift, oops, and clicking will allow me to just very, very quickly kind of create new lines for all these. You know, it doesn't matter if you're closing shapes. Again, if you notice that, like if I was to draw in a shape and I wanted to close the path, if you hover over it, it'll turn to a circle, and that's our closed path. That's essentially this. So I went forward with that for, you know, probably 45 minutes or so, maybe a little bit less. You know, that if you get into the groove and you're working quickly, you can do this fairly quickly to break down your whole face into these triangular forms just using that process of using the pen tool, holding shift to create new segments, and trying to kind of just connect those nodes that we created, right? To reduce it down into triangles to the best of your ability. So I continued that process all the way till we get to kind of what we see here on this panel. So again, this is kind of my my ending result here. If I was to let's get rid of our layers panel here. You know, I went from my initial contours just to this. We can see that in the eyes, there is a lot more kind of variation here, much smaller triangles, more detail, whereas the broader kind of parts of the face are typically a little bit more loosely defined. So this is going to give us a different effect once we finish kind of doing this. Okay, so let's go ahead and get into it. Looks like I've got another copy here. What we want to do now, let's say you've landed where I am. You've got all of your kind of polygons are kind of set in order, and we're ready to go. I keep jumping to the wrong artboard. Now what I want to do is, you know, we don't need the grid anymore. Our lines are done. It's kind of confusing, so let's just go ahead and hide the grid. And what we can do, what you actually need to do first is make sure that you select all of your lines here. I forgot to mention this part. Go to your lines. This is the triangles layer. And I just make sure that I'm not also selecting the image, so I can find that in the layers panel. and deselect that, but just select everything else. Well, you know what I might actually do is just kind of, you should be locked. I had to set this up in a different way for my own file type here. But if your image layer is locked, you can even just get your direct selection tool, drag around it, and that'll get all of your lines. Okay. First thing we want to do now, we just have these lines. What we want to do is get this kind of in order so that they all become closed shapes, all closed triangles and forms. And we can do this if we go to the window box and find our Pathfinder. Pathfinder allows you to do different things with vector paths and things like this, but the feature we want down here on the Pathfinders is divide. And if I click this, it might not be super evident right away, but what it's done is it's closed all those paths into individual triangles. You know, each of those Pathfinder options does something different, but in this case, that's the one that we want to use. Okay, so let's just go back over to this artboard here, and let's kind of zoom in. I've already done this on this one. I've got my divide on the Pathfinder, and now we've got individual triangles. If I spin down my low poly group, we can see I've already started to kind of paint some of these in here, but it's really simple actually to do. The first thing that we want to do is just start kind of clicking down and find if you select one here with the bullet, it'll highlight over in your window where that is. And if I just zoom in, I can see it a little bit better. But the first thing I want to do is just go over and grab the eyedropper tool, or you can just press the I key on your button and use it to click in the center. And we can see now it has changed that from a green outline triangle to one that is filled with that color that our eyedropper picked. So you'll keep going down this process, just picking the color in the center. There might be little things like this. I can see these are closed paths, weird little things that happened. Typically, I can just find those and delete them by selecting them and clicking the trash can down below. Let's see here. That looks like it's a real one. So let's go ahead and just kind of click into this at the center. Again, you might need to, it shuffles around a little bit, so you might need to zoom in and out to find where each one is. Didn't quite get this one. I can zoom in, get the dark of that eye, dark of this one, and also kind of like looking for the average color or something that's going to provide some amount of variation is nice. There's one I can delete. Little anomalies might pop up, but those can always be fixed after the fact. Again, kind of click in here, click in here. So this can go on and on and on. Here's one I can delete. Anytime I see like a filled in triangle or something, it seems like those don't really need to be there. So I can just go ahead and click and delete them. So as I was saying, you know, this can take a lot of time. We can see if I spin down, there's a lot of these paths that I need to pick the color for. This is the perfect time to put on a podcast or a movie or something, you know, that you want to binge watch but don't have to pay attention too much visually to follow, and kind of zone out and zen out with this, because it will take some time. It's not a hard process, but as we can see, it is a little time consuming to kind of get through all of these and clean it up. So the process itself is really simple. Once you get your kind of lines, your portrait broken down into those individual shapes, and you've hit that divide button on the Pathfinder, it's really just going through, selecting one at a time. And we can probably get rid of this one. And just using that eyedropper to fill in the color. Again, if you end up with things that aren't necessarily, it's not, you have like one or two shapes in here that aren't triangles or seem a little incongruous. Oops, redo this. I want to get rid of that. You know, it's okay to fudge it a little bit, take some artistic liberty in this if it just makes a better looking picture. You know, there's no hard rule about it needing to be consistent in, you know, the triangles approach. There's sometimes things that will end up kind of bleeding together, or, you know, more complex shape patterns that might come out. So that's essentially it. You know, if I was to go and click off my image file here at the very bottom of the visibility, we can see, you know, I haven't got much filled in, but we're starting to see kind of the shapes and the colors of the eyes kind of come in. We're seeing the colors kind of select. So I continued that for a long time, probably, not that long, maybe about an hour for me. And I ended up with something like this, right? This is nice kind of low poly, kind of image. There's still a fair amount of detail in the eyes and things like this. You know, if I can click in, I hope I can kind of see it in a little bit more detail. There we go. We can see I still have all those polys there, but it was just filling in the patterns, and now I've got kind of my floating head in space. The last thing I did with this was just that I went and I created a background color. You know, I created a new layer behind it, and I just drew out a box. That's something that you can play with too, you know, playing with a color field that maybe suits your picture a little bit better. I thought, you know, maybe if it's blue, that's interesting. Doesn't really matter, but I just was kind of working with these skin tones. So there we go. I've got my low poly thing kind of worked out. It looks convincingly like me, but still kind of reduced to those basic kind of shapes. And I'm pretty happy with where it is. So I just want to export it. Let's go to File. Let's go to Export As. And let's just call this Low Poly Portrait and JPEG. And I'm going to click Use Artboards. What that's going to do is it's just going to cut it around. On my file, I have 4 artboards. So I just want to click the first one. For you, you can just use all artboards, assuming you're only set up to have one artboard in your Illustrator document. So let's go ahead and export. We can pick the color scheme and the file size. And now I should be good to go. Here's my image, looking great. Fairly happy with it. You know, there are things that I probably would spend more time on cleaning up, but as a quick demonstration, I think it's a pretty good one. So that's kind of your challenge this week, is just to follow this process, create a low poly portrait of your own. I'm looking forward to seeing what you come up with. Again, you can pick whoever you want. I would highly recommend, though, working with an original photo and something that is high enough resolution that's going to give you a good effect. So again, let me know in case you have any problems with this, or if you're having trouble in Illustrator, and I can help walk you through it. Otherwise, I'll look forward to seeing what you come up with.